You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
You're listening to the award-winning podcast, The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, featuring business leaders to help you navigate a constantly changing marketplace. Want to become known as a trusted authority while building a thriving business you love? The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show will show you how. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, brought to you by the influencealliance.com, the business building community for change makers who want to build a sustainable and scalable business they love. And I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, my guest today says to succeed in business, you have to match your passion with a purpose that will help you reach whatever goals you have set yourself. So joining me on today's show is Sunil Godse. Now, after making a series of bad decisions, with one leading to a friend being shot and killed, Sunil spent thousands of hours on research and interviews to stop people from wasting time making bad decisions by sharpening their intuition. Now, on today's show, Sunil is going to share why using intuition helps you make the right business decision each and every time, why people ignore their intuition, and 7 steps to make sure that the decision you are making is the right one. So welcome to the show, Sunil.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. And thanks for this opportunity to share with your listeners how they can tap into their intuition to really become amazing entrepreneurs.
Yes, absolutely. And as I shared a bit of the background as to what led you down the path of really researching that, so often situations, and we shared that, what happened was it led to one of your friends. Sometimes it's the situations that have us kind of take a step back and take our breath away, but that lead us to being able to explore and now, of course, share. I'm going to start off by asking one of the second points that you wanted to talk about, but I think it's a great way to open the show. What have you found that has really identified why people ignore their intuition?
So there's a number of things that are happening there. Because intuition is really complex, and this is one of the reasons why I dove right into it, is because when I trusted my intuition, I remember when I was 5 years old, I had this voice that was telling me to go door to door to raise money because my dad didn't want to buy some video games for me. And that sort of really started the entrepreneurial spark for me. And so I remember listening to intuition back then. And I raised $200 going door to door. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to a charity. But they're equally, and you talk about, my friend being shot and killed. If you look at even when I ignored intuition, this is when I actually, and for those watching, I'm a South Asian male and firstborn son. So there's really kind of 4 career states for people like me. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And I went into door number 3. And so that became the engineer in me. And then when I became a management consultant, there were some contract terms that were changing. In both of those cases, from a sort of a career business perspective, I ignored my intuition. And so when I was in engineering, I ended up becoming an entrepreneur by starting off as an investor in a Mexican firm. And pretty soon I was making 5 times more than an engineer. And I quickly trusted my intuition to move into entrepreneurship. And I lost my relationship with my dad. And then, it's $20 million later, 5 or 6 ventures. But in the management consulting contract, with the contract terms are changing, there was this something that was telling me that I should back off. And I was so emotionally vested in the contract that I ended up spending every single penny going down to Silicon Valley. And the company never paid me. And I came back to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account. So I clearly know that there's something that was, when I was 5, there was this voice, but then there was all these other somethings that were telling me what the right decision was. And I just didn't listen to them. And so this kind of got me started down this path of thinking, okay, then why? Like, what are these somethings called? And so when I looked at the research at the time, a lot of this is, when we're going back into 2012, 2013, a lot of the research around intuition was sort of spiritual nature and cosmic and all that. So if you're looking at it from a business perspective, that didn't really lend itself well to, I mean, it's great from the personal side if you believe that that's what intuition is, that's where it comes. But I really need to dig to find out what these somethings were. And so I really need to blend art and science. So I looked at the science because I come from that logical engineering decision kind of background. And there were tens and thousands of articles on intuition. There's brain scans that are showing where it lights up. It hits the amygdala, which is your fight or flight center. Research has shown that infants as young as 2 months have shown to have intuitive capabilities. From a business perspective, they actually measured the intuition of entrepreneurs. They measured things like skin conductance and heart rate. And they found that intuition acted 7 seconds on average before an entrepreneur made a business decision. That was back in 2013. A colleague was telling me that current neuroscience research that's going to be coming out is showing that that's as early as 23 seconds before you actually take an action or make a decision, either in a personal or professional context. And there's tons of people talking about it from the business perspective, from Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs, Sarah Blakely, Oprah, the Harry Potter series, Richard Branson.
Taboo, or we don't talk about that intuition anymore. Would you say that intuition is similar to gut feeling?
So that's how it characterizes itself. So this is where we really have to think about how we are as individuals. So because intuition is a phenomenon, it's a subconscious phenomenon that you're born with. It's about your experiences and it's about your signals. And so we each have individual signals that come up. So the common one is gut feeling. But the way that intuitive signals start is they actually start really subtle in nature. And as you ignore those subtle signals, they start to change and they get louder. Or in some cases, and some people have gone bankrupt because they've ignored all the signs or the signals that intuition is giving them. So when we say gut feeling or even hear a voice, those are two common ones. Mm-hmm. You don't know if that's signal number 1 or signal number 3. So if it's signal number 1, you're great because you're listening to that first signal. And so you're making a decision based on intuition. But if it's signal number 3, from a business perspective, you've ignored 2 signals already. And so that means that you've made 2 bad business decisions. Now, those 2 bad business decisions could be a small blip on a P&L statement, or it could be that you're headed towards bankruptcy. I mean, you don't know the severity of that because it's really about that decision you're making, yes or no. And the severity of that decision, you won't find out until you actually make the decision.
Yes.
And so that's why it's very important to spend the time to really get to know your signals.
And I know that you're going to talk about the 7 steps and possibly what you've already shared as a couple of them. So, I can think of a number of situations where there has just been this inkling and then you make a decision, and how many times we go, I knew I should have not done that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How often can we relate to that?
Absolutely. And it's very common. I've interviewed over 1,000 people now on intuition. And I really found that it came down to 3 groups of people. One, there's those that absolutely believe in intuition. They act on it. We've got the Jeff Bezoses and the Tim Cooks and all that. And so they get it. And I had a Buddhist monk actually on my podcast series talk about that. Then there's others that kind of talk about it, but they don't walk the talk. And so there's a colleague of mine he was in New York, and he's really changing the way that students really kind of have education so that they can become better leaders. And he and I got together because of this he talks about, positivity and, mindset. And I talk about intuition. It's a great cross section. And then he saw me speak, and there were sort of the 4 types of intuition, and there were signals. And so when I explained it from that perspective, it really crystallized it for him. And then he noticed the signals came up when he contracted COVID-19, and he ignored them because, remember, he was not walking the talk, and he ignored them, and he ended up fighting for his breath. And he actually came to a point where he wanted to die. It was so bad for him. And the true value of intuition basically came to him and said, listen, your voice is not done yet. You have more work. But the way he made decisions was crystal clear after he came out of the hospital, whereas before he kind of meandered around that decision. And when he came out 5 days later, I was one of the first ones he talked to. And he's actually my very first podcast guest for my podcast series. So what a way to start a podcast series on intuition. And it was interesting that there's this group of people that don't believe what intuition is. And one of my first interviewees was a fellow by the name of John Rothschild. He was at that time chairman and CEO of Cara Operations Limited. And so this is an investment banker, business decisions, data, spreadsheets. That's all that mattered to him. And when you talk about things like omens and spirituality, he's just not going to have it. So he said, okay, come down. I'll give you an hour. We'll talk about intuition for 5 minutes. And the rest of the time, we'll catch up. I haven't seen you in a while. So the camera is on, and you can clearly see by his body language and his language. He says, yes, Sunil, you know what? I don't see omens. I wish I could shake that person's hand. I make business decisions. I just don't think intuition just really figures into it. And so as we're talking, I'm actually educating him. And this is now when we get into the 4 types of intuition. One of the types of intuition is called experiential intuition. So when you look at the businesses that you've had before, the experiences that you've had with the products or services that you've sold, or others have, personal experiences, your intuition is putting that and parking it in the subconscious area of your brain. And so when you're actually making a decision, it's actually already informed by your past learning experience, both formal and informal, both good and bad, both yours and others. And so in a split second, it's already informed when it comes to a decision from the past. And so, and in some cases, you can make a business decision that goes against that data. And so John says, oh, well, I have a perfect example of this. And now we're getting into the second type of intuition. So he used a benchmarking system. He was running franchise operations, and a franchise location like a McDonald's or a Wendy's or a Burger King will only go, if there was a 9 out of 10. And you're looking at traffic flow patterns, you're looking at the development and things like that. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into it. But ultimately, it comes back down to a 10-factor scale, a 10-point scale. And there was this location that he and his partner went to, and the location, if you work the numbers, was a 5.5 out of 10. There's no way his team would put a location there. But he goes there and he just says, there's something about this location. There's something about it that just tells me we should put one. That's the second type of intuition, called situational intuition. When you're in a situation, when sometimes you're in a room or alley that something's off. That's what he and his partner felt for this location. 5.5 out of 10. No way he would have put it, but they put a location in there. That ended up being one of the biggest, most profitable franchise operations, called the Beer Market, under his whole restaurant portfolio. And so that's the second type. Now we're moving on to, now he's kind of getting it. He says, I think there's intuition. And so he's kind of getting into it. He's believing it a bit. And then he says, okay, I actually want to quit because I want to run this bankrupt little restaurant. And that's the third type of intuition, called creative intuition. So creative intuition looks at what type of decision that you're making. And so this is a guy making $3 to $4 million a year. He is in private jets, limousines, high-end restaurants, amazing career as an investment banker. And he wants to quit all of that to run a tiny bankrupt little restaurant. Everybody thought he was nuts. And then now we get into the fourth type, called relational intuition. The people that were advising him were looking out for the safest route possible. But now he realizes that he was guided by intuition. And now where he's fully in this thing, he's talking about intuition, his body language is in there, he's using the terms intuition, and yet he said to the naysayers, I'm not going to listen to you, thank you very much. But he goes to his wife, who he trusts, and he says, listen, it just feels right. And of course, that's what he does. And so his creative intuition makes the decision. He quits his investment banking, walks into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations in North America. In 20 years, $2 billion in total revenues before he retired, all because of an intuitive decision. And when he says it felt right, now we're talking about the intuitive signals. For him, it felt right. And so we all have a basket of positive and negative signals that we all have to get in tune with. And the more work that we do in understanding what the inventory of positive ones and the inventory of negative ones are, every time we make a decision, we'll know it's the right one because it's a positive signal or it's a negative signal. And if you make a decision and it turns out bad, it's not intuition's fault. What you've done is you've either not done the work to see what those subtle signals are, or you've fallen prey to one of 4 intuitive hurdles that really, really screw up your ability to listen to intuition. So that's how much work you have to do. That's how complex it is. And so when people say, you say at the start, it's a gut feeling. Those are great terms to use as generalities, but it's really complex. And what I'm doing is really, just opening the hood to say, okay, this is how complex it is. This is how it behaves. When you understand that, then every decision you make is going to be the right one. And then you stop wasting time making the bad decisions.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is that the cost of making a bad decision is actually 2 times the cost, which is something I call opportunity cost. It's not just the cost of making a bad decision. It's also the cost of not making the right decision. And so it's 2 times the cost. And if you look at hiring, for example, if you hire the wrong person, it's not just the lost productivity and the dollars per hour you put in hiring that person. What about the person that would have improved in productivity and more because they're actually producing? So, and that's a direct Excel spreadsheet that I can put dollars to a bad decision.
And a cost that often is not spoken about could be a psychological cost, in that how many times when you do ignore something, or you just go gang ho because you try and justify it, you try and you play it over in your head, and what it can tend to do is that you can, if we're not careful, mistrust, and doubt yourself, and you really don't want that to happen either. I mean, this is just incredible things, and I know that you're talking about, for many of us, it's quite new. And of course, at the end of the episode, we're going to give people an opportunity to find out how they can connect with you. I know that you talked about the 4 different types of intuition, which I shared with the experiential intuition, situational, creative, and relational. Let's talk about then the 7 steps to make sure that the decision you're making is the right one. Do you want to run us through those 7 steps, Sunil?
Absolutely. So the first thing I get people to do in that 7-step process, and when they want to take it on the website, they can copy the ebook. That's free. The 7-step process is also free. So there's no cost to taking this. One of the things that you want to do, the first thing is obviously identify a problem. And so you figure out what problem that you have. And one of the things that I get you to do is a couple of things. I actually measure your intuition on a percentage basis at the very start. And then of the 4 types of intuition, you take a test, again, a quiz, to see which of the 4 are really driving your decisions, because one is usually heavier than the other 3 in driving your decisions. So you just get a sense of how you make decisions. The next thing you do is identify a problem that you want to solve. And it could be a burning problem. It could be just a tiny problem that you have. And then what didn't work in the past. And when you looked at what didn't work in the past, not only do you list those steps down, what did it feel like in the moment? And what I'm trying to get at that point is to see, okay, what were the negative intuitive signals that were informing me? And you write as many steps as you can, because the more that you can put on down and the more intuitive signals you can identify, the better that's going to come up later in that 7-day challenge. Once you have the negative signals down, the next thing I get you to do is put you in something called an intuitive medium. And what an intuitive medium is, what do you do to cut out the noise to think about the problem you're going to solve? So for me, for example, in the shower is one where I do a lot of thinking. For some weird reason, in the middle of the night, I'll wake up and a lot of my marketing decisions are driven in the middle of the night. I'm not sure why. I'm driving long distances. Some people take a walk. Some people, exercise, cycle. Whatever it is for you, figure out where you go to cut out the noise and just think about the problem. And then once you identify what those intuitive mediums are, you put yourself in that intuitive medium and you think about, how am I going to solve this? And so when you start putting the steps down of how you're going to solve it, think about what it feels like in that moment. If one of the signals coming up is one of the negative signals because you've already done your homework, that's not something you should be putting on the list. And then once you have that, now you've got then you're going to have positive signals. So positive signals usually, like the dots are connecting. It feels right. There's a flow. And
it's a validation almost, isn't it? Like in a knowing.
It's an inner knowing. You just know that that's absolutely, this is what I need to do. And what you're going to find out is once you have these positive signals, once you have a negative signal come in, it's going to start creeping in. It says, I know this, the signal's coming in. And so now you've got a positive set of signals. The next thing you also want to do is, who are the people that are going to solve this problem? And so I in the 7-day challenge, I look at 4 groups of people. And ultimately, you want to have the people that are going to solve this particular problem. It may not be your best friend. It may not be someone in your circle. It could be someone, it could be a mentor, it could be somebody outside. But for your problem, how many people are going to solve it? It's 1, 2 people. Who are they're going to identify that you can go to ask them to help you. And then the other thing I get you to do is, what environment do you have to get into? Do you have to actually physically move to an environment? Do you have to change the technology? What are some of the environments that you have to do to change? If at all, you may not have to, but for this problem, you figure it out. And the last is take action. You've got the steps, and you just have to take action. And so that's basically your 7-day step process. And while you go through the 7-day challenge, as I call it, I have 2 people going through it that walk you through every single day and what decision they did and the task that they did for that decision. One fellow's name is John Harris. He actually used the 7-day challenge to sell his house. And on day 1, he almost caved in to selling his house for $20,000 under asking price because of a belligerent real estate agent. But he trusted his intuition, and he started pushing her away, and then pushed some family members away so that he can talk to himself and his wife. And then at the end, there was a bidding war, and he settled on $50,000 over asking price. That's a $70,000 decision in 7 days. And the other person going through the 7 days is someone who was actually a witness to a homicide. Ashley Michelle actually walked into her boyfriend's apartment. He had just murdered one of their friends. He closed the door behind her, locked the door, put a knife to her neck, and said, "You're next." And her intuition got her to be calm. Her relational intuition super heightened to make sure that this guy just stays calm, and she does exactly what he says. He chokes her, he assaults her, he asked her to clean the blood, which she refused. She got an intuitive moment. Her intuition said now. She unlocked the doors, ran 18 flights of stairs down into the main lobby, called 911, and she lived to tell the story to me. She used the 7-day challenge to minimize her PTSD, depression, and anxiety. It's not going to cure it, but in those 7 days, not only did she learn that she needed to go back to the gym, so that's that intuitive medium I was talking about. That was for her where she can sit and think, and she can just emotionally just be at peace. And she started to learn how to trust people in those 7 days. So if John can go through this, and if Ashley can find a solution in 7 days, so can you.
Oh, brilliant. So as you were sharing some of the examples, and then going back to which of those intuition, experiential, situational, creative, relational, a couple of questions that came up for me. And by the way, for those of you who are watching and listening, please, if you've got a question, ask, and I'll make sure that I pose that to Sunil. Would you say then that for all of us, it's good to be able to have all of those, because each of those experiential, situational, creative, relational can be used to a specific situation? Like relational, it can be best for this situation. So what we want to do is aim to get an awareness and a strength in all of those. Is that correct to assume?
Absolutely, absolutely. And not all 4 are going to be working. Like, for example, creative intuition could be at heightened when you're making an obtuse decision like John Rothschild, or if it's something mundane, which is, kind of habitual. Your creative intuition is really going to be low. But you do want to have some strength so that you're able to dial it up to 100% or close to it when you need to make those decisions. And this is where you really need to work on, the 4 types. And the other thing is, being 100% on all of them is not necessarily what's meant to be for everyone. So from a professional perspective, maybe someone who's an accountant loves accounting. And so for them, creative decisions aren't something high on their list. Whereas, more the experiential intuition, relational intuition in terms of getting clients, and situational intuition, we're figuring out, what's the business, do the numbers reflect the business? Those need to be heightened. Whereas somebody in a digital marketing play, for example, or an entrepreneur starting out, needs to be heightened on that creative intuition, because they've got to be able to pivot or create a product or service that is really, really outstanding, that solves a need that somebody's going to pay you for. And sometimes you got to be way outside the norm to do that. And that's where your creative intuition needs to be heightened. And so this is the challenge now, is to do the work, to not only get in touch with your signals, look at the different 4 types, strengthen it, and continue to do this, because it's always a work in progress over time. And it seems like a lot of work, but what happens is over time, you become so good at it that you just flow. And you actually reduce the number of people in your life, because you filter. It's a great filtering mechanism to only keep people around you who are great for your business, the ones you hire or mentor. And in your personal life, those are going to support you in what you're doing. Not yes people. These are people that are just going to support you in the thick and thins, the ups and downs, and give you great criticism. And they're going to ebb and flow. But you have this small, tiny circle of people around you. That support is also going to help you as an entrepreneur, help you as a business person, because you don't have to worry about that. They're there to pick you up if you need. They're there if you need some mentorship, if you need some advice. You just need to sit and have a coffee with them and just chat, and that's it. And so that's again where intuition helps you. And so when you operate like that, everything it just feels smooth.
I mean, as you're sharing that, and it's interesting that a conversation that you shared, you had with someone who said, well, I don't really know if I agree with any of this. I'm strengths in this particular area. What I have come to realize in my own life, and what I've observed of others too, I mean, we all have natural gifts, strengths and talents that we use. However, often when we overplay those, they can become a weakness. But what we don't realize is that there's certain aspects that if we can tap into, it can just bring what we're doing to a completely different level. Not that we need to sit in it consistently, but it's a check-in. So it can either be the missing thing that is keeping us stuck, or it'll enable us to take what we're doing to a much greater level that we didn't really know it was possible. I wonder, have you, since you've started to, obviously you've been studying this and just immersing yourself in this area, were you able to find, and I think this is what I understand too, when we do an assessment, we probably gravitate towards maybe one or more of these intuitions, and maybe don't even know that that's what's happening. But were you able then to recognize, well, you know what, creative intuition is not something that I naturally do. I want to try and enhance that a little bit more. So have you been able to strengthen, or firstly, identify which of those you have used more, and then being able to develop in those other areas? Have you found that for yourself too?
Absolutely. So the weakest one for me was sort of relational intuition, and I was quite strong on the creative. I'm constantly doing things that are different than everybody else. I'm able to sort of the situations, I'm able to kind of get a sense of them. And experiential, I've got so much vast experience when it comes to entrepreneurship and management consulting that I can draw from, where I've actually used intangible things like trust to build, grow a business from 350,000 to 3.5 million. And so these are the experiences I can draw from. But the relational intuition was where I used to give people second chances. Now, intuition already gives you second chances, so I give third or fourth chances. And even though I know that I should be letting go of a partner, or not consider somebody for a partner, or not hire this person, or not involve this person in this project, or look at that vendor, or I think this is not good. I'm going to buy this program, but I think I've already, like, 3/4 of it is something that I already know. I'm paying for 1/4 of it, which doesn't make sense from a dollar per program perspective when you kind of use that kind of math. That was really, really weak for me. And so I really needed to, just buckle up and be a lot more stricter with say, no, I have a bad sense about this person. I'm not going to allow that person again, or cut them off early. Because everything's always good emotionally when you have someone that wants to come on the team, or you want to deal with something, and that emotional height, being too emotional, squishes the intuitive signal down. And even though the signals are trying to get up, I'm just like, I get so excited. And so what I often need to do is, anytime I have someone that I know wants to come on board, I always give it 24 hours. At that 24-hour mark, I'm doing enough thinking so that my intuition can come up. I can get rid of the emotions. My head and heart are balanced. Emotions and logic are balanced. And then can come up with a decision. And more often than not, it's like, you know what? I don't think this is the right time, or I don't think we're aligned. And I'm getting better at that, right? So even myself, even though I study it, I try and practice, and I kind of know the one area that I want to improve. And that's exactly what is the sort of the blueprint of what I do for those who work out with me on one-on-one, is that, okay, where do you want to go, and what do we need to work on? Or is there something in the past that's really blocking them? and they're so stuck emotionally in the past, or they're stuck from it's okay to have some memories of what's happened in the past, but they're emotionally blocking themselves, and they're not able to make certain decisions when it comes to hiring, or they're hiring one type of person, and everybody else is kind of like that person, and they don't move forward because you don't get the innovative and creative thinking from multiple different angles, which you're going to need, right? You don't want everybody thinking like you, because then how do you expand, pivot, get different ideas when you're hiring?
Yeah. As you're sharing about the experiential intuition, and I would imagine too that intuition can increase through maturity and the different experiences that you have. And so would you then say that experiential intuition for a younger person, that will continue to grow and develop through the experiences that you have? And with you, as you mentioned, the relational around the emotions. I mean, for some of us, and I've studied MBTI. When you think of the feeling and the thinker uses more the logic, the feeler uses the emotions, and I don't want to fire that person because what happens with their family and so forth. But really, as you were saying, the decision, is that person the best fit for the role? And if not, then you have to make that decision that, well, can we reassign them to another area of the business, or maybe the decision for both parties is one to part ways. Those are the kind of the things that that you were sharing. And we've got a comment here from Iman. When a man says, I have a bad feeling about this, he's an expert and it pays off. When a woman says she's emotional and mixing her personal hormones with business. Yeah, I know that's said, but you know what? I think there is both. And again, there's a balance. And exactly, I think what you said, Sunil, which beautifully aligns with that you were saying, if you allow that emotion and that, what happens if I have to let this person go? If that can, and that person is not excelling for the business, and ultimately they're going to know that too. But so by leaving them in that role, it's inhibiting them too, because they'll know then they're not contributing. I think that you even struggled with that. So yeah,
absolutely.
Not just gender, men and women.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things there. So when people have sort of a reaction to the intuitive decision you make, and whoever brought that was excellent, because these are what other people are going to think. If I'm making a decision on intuition, I really don't care what you think, because if this is what I think, if this is great for me and where I want to go, you can have whatever reaction you want. It's my path, my intuition, my decisions. I know I'm making it for me. And I often say this is my train. This is the track that I'm on. If you don't like the journey I'm on, get off at the next station. And if you're going to continue to be bothered, I'll kick you off myself. Now that may be harsh, but that's how harsh that people have to get. I think because we're so bombarded by everybody else's intentions and what they think, and armchair entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs and social media marketing and ads and all this stuff, when we're just getting bombarded with this stuff, when we just have to sit and listen and think about what we want. And so, yeah, okay, if that's what you think it is, and women are characterized like that, guess what? The research shows that women are 350% more profitable when it comes to using intuition in business. Guess what? Women's brains have more neurons going between the lobes, which means they're more empathetic, which is what you need in a business when you're running a business on intuition. So I can throw data at you when up the yin yang, if you want to kind of go that route, if it's a gender issue. And the other thing is, when you also run a business on intuition and you attract those type of people, you naturally repel those that aren't going to fit in, or use your business as a statistic, because your intuition drives your core values. Intuition is really at the amygdala. So there's no language around fight or flight. As core values in a business, we put language around that. And that language is that feeling. So when you come into a business, you have to feel like you want to work there. And intuition is a two-way street. So if the leaders are talking about intuition, but they're not acting on intuition, the intuition as me coming in as a partner or as an employee is going to pick up on that, saying there's a disconnect between what you're saying and what you're doing. And I'm watching what you're doing, when you're not even looking. So if my intuition is saying that there's a disconnect and you're trying to use intuitive language, but you're not acting like that, I'm gone. And so are my talents, and so is my creativity, because I'm going to take it to another company. And you can see this in the statistics of Gen Ys and Gen Zs, average of 3.9 and 3.2 years respectively in a role. And the one people can say that they're lazy and all that entitled. There's that side. I just think that there's just businesses that are so operating on P&Ls that they don't really care too much about the empathy. They're stuck on old ways of doing things, and they want to. They just they can. They just don't know how to. It's concept again, walk the talk versus talk the talk. And so I think that that's why people get disillusioned with businesses, even more so in these COVID days, where people are looking for a purpose. We talked about purpose at the start. What's the company's purpose? What are they making the customers feel? What need are they really solving for that customer? And that's what you do as a salesperson. That's what you're doing in operations. You're filling a need for someone who really needs your products and services. Even something as accounting, somebody doesn't want that headache, right? And it's a mess for them. So you're really filling that need so that they can go and be creative. They can go and run their business so they can fill other customers' needs. When you run a business intuitively like that, you attract people for the purpose that you have, and you'll self-select everybody else out. And the other thing you were actually talking about earlier is about developing over time. Absolutely, intuition is like a muscle. And what we haven't done to the younger generation is we haven't talked about intuition. I mean, I certainly didn't know about those things, but of course, my kids they're 9 and 14. They have the luxury of me talking about intuition all the time. And yes, as much as they roll their eyes, saying, "Oh my God, here goes Dad about intuition again." Oh my God, another podcast. Oh, I was even before we came on, Dad, another podcast? I said, yeah, it's going to be great. So as much as they have that, they've learned to move away from bullying situations even 3-4 years ago, when they noticed the behavior at the start and they moved away before even getting into it. And if for those watching, you can see the art behind me. The art is painted by my daughter when she was 12. She is now 14. She actually runs a federal nonprofit corporation, a Canadian federal corporation, raising money for disabilities and illnesses. That's her purpose through art. She's raised over $30,000 so far in a year and a half. And she was like 12 and 13. She doubled her sales at a fundraiser from 2,500 to 5,000. But her purpose, this is where the intuition comes in. Her purpose is to help those with disabilities and illnesses. And she had a pop-up event, and she had this person who had cerebral palsy, and Parkinson's. His left arm was shaking, right? And so he called my daughter over and he said, "I love this event." And he says, "Watch what your event is doing." And he puts the brush to the canvas and his left arm stops. That's purpose led by intuition in a single moment. And it solidified exactly what she wants to do, led by intuition. And if more businesses, entrepreneurs had their businesses like this, can you imagine the people that you attract as customers, as employees, as vendors, as suppliers? And that if that's your ecosystem, you'll crush your competition, and they won't even see you're coming because you don't have any fanfare. You're just moving ahead.
They're subtle and they're analytical. I mean, we need that, but everything that you're saying, I think you're starting to see that customers, and especially now that the young people who really don't just desire it, they demand it. Yep. It's been proven that if an organization does not align to the values of these young people, they will not do business with you. And as leaders of businesses, do we even know what our purpose is? Are we encouraging this? Do we have a balanced team that contributes? And I love the way that you've shared what you've shared today. And I know that we've only just shared, scratched the surface. But if you create that kind of environment, and as you mentioned, it really takes everything to the next level, and it almost becomes part of when we know the culture, and we talk about that often too. But it's something that it's like an invisible thread that ties everything together, and people just want to do business with us because of how the experience that we're creating. And Absolutely. Guess what? The experience is how people feel, not just because whatever. So I think businesses who are just driven by profit, has to be purpose, has to be people, has to be planet. I mean, now I think because of what's happened around the world, people are far more, they want to take businesses to account. What are you doing across all of those areas for your people? If it's just driven by profit and greed, goodbye, we're not going to do business with you.
Absolutely. And profits and all those things are laggard indicators. What you're not doing is fixing the leading indicator. And there's a reason why 91% of businesses fail in the first 2 years and 99% don't even make it past year 5. And those are just the reported statistics. I think it's much higher than that. And it's because everybody's looking at these laggard indicators. If it's a laggard indicator, you're too late, right? There should be a leading indicator you should be fixing, because the laggard indicator will fix itself. So if you're always looking at the profits, you're already behind. And what damage have you done to get that? If it's 1 quarter, well, but how many quarters, right?
Yes.
And so that's how you think about these things. And that's where the intangible now becomes tangible.
Yeah.
Right.
What I love about what you've said too, and then I'll get you to share with people how to get in contact with you, that so many industries now have been challenged. We need to find new ways. We need to discover new ways. We need to encourage our team to be innovative, to use intuition, to tap into ideas collaboratively, individually, to be able to come up with innovative ideas. And the only way to do that is to, as you just said, create, environments that allow us to do that. Figure out where is the medium, where do you do your best thoughts? Maybe I'm like you, in the shower, and sometimes just before I'm going to sleep when I wake up, and I just get up, sometimes 1 o'clock, sometimes 4 o'clock, and my colleagues, if I type, just move my computer, Facebook shows that up. What are you doing up?
Right.
And recognize that, because you could come up with the next idea that saves an entire community that is currently, in poverty because of that one idea, but you've just ignored it because you've just rolled over and gone back to sleep. So, these are just some things that you're sharing. And I think awareness is wonderful. Now become more mindful and take action to really investigate, what are you leaving on the table? What are you not tapping into? So Sunil, how can people find out more, access? I think you mentioned you've got a book, you've got a podcast. What's the best way for them to connect?
Absolutely. So if you go to intuitionology.com, there's a free ebook there. There's access to the podcast series with the links to all the different podcast apps, iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, Google Podcasts, etc. There's I mentioned a free ebook that takes you to the 7-day challenge. Once again, it's completely free. You solve the question, you solve a burning problem that you want based on your intuitive capabilities. I'm on all the different social channels. I'm even going to try TikTok without dancing, because if I dance, people's intuition is going to say, stop dancing, Sunil. So I'll be having some tips and tricks there. And they can always DM me or send me an email at sunil@sunilgodse.com. Happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast